I remember the Civil War was still a bit of a gleam in our eye, and I was in a bar in Georgetown in Washington with a good friend, and we were talking about how difficult it was going to be to tell the story of the Civil War, and that maybe afterwards we should do a short, 2-hour film about our love of baseball and the history of that. And so that always stuck in our mind. That would be the dessert after this pretty difficult story of trying to tell the Civil War.
Well, I was very lucky to find out that Ken needed some help finishing up the Civil War. It was the summer of 1989, and so he needed someone kind of in a panic, I would say, because the show was almost done, and he didn't have time to even really look for someone, to be honest. And luckily for me, I was the person who happened to walk in the door. So I got hired to finish up clearing the rights on pictures and sort of administrative cleanup for the Civil War. And as that was wrapping up, Ken said, I have another project coming up. It's a big series on the history of baseball. Would you be willing to produce it? And I said, would I be willing? I think I would.
And then when we got done with the Civil War, we realized that we had more ambitious ideas, that we saw that in some ways the film on baseball would be a sequel to the Civil War series. And as crazy as that sounds, we tend to think of American history as just a narrative of presidential administrations punctured by war. The biggest war was the Civil War. But we know that that leaves so many other aspects out, and that baseball could, in its big epic sweep, pick up that political military narrative, but also touch on other things, touch on race and the exclusion of African-American players. It touches on labor and management tensions. That's been the age-old battle between the owners and the players. It touches on immigration and assimilation as each wave of immigrants found a sense of citizenship much more important than a piece of paper by the State Department. Participation in the national pastime of their newly adopted land meant something. This was about the growth and decay and now rebirth of cities. This was about heroes and villains and fools. It was about, popular culture and advertising, the exclusion of women, I'm sorry to say. And so all of these issues that are important as the political military ones could be brought along with baseball.
I don't think Ken or I ever would have imagined that we would come back to baseball. We spent quite a lot of time, and in 18.5 hours, had quite a lot to say about the history of the game. And it never crossed my mind that we would ever revisit it. And the only thing I do know is that in the original series, the Red Sox won the World Series in 1918. And we had a line in the narration, and it said, they would never win another. And I remember saying to Ken, are you sure you really want to say that? I mean, they might win, And he said, if they do, we'll reopen it, and then we'll fix it, or we'll make a new show, or we'll do something. And I thought, yeah, right.
Let me just lay my cards flat on the table. I think we've done this update because the Red Sox won the World Series in 2004.
And so, guess what happened in 2004? I come to work on, the day after the World Series, and Ken is saying, we're going back, we're gonna make another baseball. And of course, he was so excited about it, and it was an idea, but it didn't seem like it could possibly actually happen.
I had always assumed I'd never update a film. And I don't plan to do that in any other film except perhaps baseball, because I do believe it accompanies our national narrative and does reflect us, is this perfect prism through which we can see refracted much more than the history of a simple sport. There was something incredibly joyous for those of us in New England to watch our Red Sox finally kind of get the monkey off the back and win the World Series in 2004. And it's a dramatic story of how they did it. But you also begin to realize that baseball had mirrored us in many other ways, and it was important to begin to gather the threads of what those mirrors were, good and bad, and to try to figure out how you could compact this into, in this case, a couple of episodes that would make up the top and the bottom of our 10th inning.
So many of the themes from the first series continue to play out, and then there were a lot of new ones that come into it. And if we believe, as I do, that baseball is a great way to look at American society, that's just as true now as it was 15 years ago or 50 years ago. And some of the things in the last 15 years in our society have been wonderful and exciting, and some have been complicated and difficult, and it's all there in the film.
Baseball's been never better. The level of play on the field today is as good as anything we have ever seen, and I would suggest even better. So we felt it was our obligation to remind people that A, this is the greatest game that's ever been invented. and I'll have somebody bigger than me fight anyone who doesn't agree. That two, we see ourselves in the middle of this media explosion where it's no longer a game that you go to, it's a game that you watch on TV or you download onto your phone, or that you get the instant updates on this application, or that you're participating in fantasy, or you're going to a World Baseball Classic, or you're participating in all the ways you can now enjoy this sport. Baseball's sort of leading the way in that. So we just felt it was time to kind of gather all of the spare parts of the last, in this case, 18 years, and just say, press play. Let's go ahead.
When our show aired in 1994 was the strike. And that was a devastating, catastrophic event for baseball. We were sort of in shock that it was actually happening when the show was on, because we'd been looking forward to it being the baseball season and sort of sharing in the celebration of the game that we had created with the game itself, going on. And instead, there was a lot of anger and frustration in the country at what was happening in the game at that time. And it was a really dark and painful time for the game. What's happened since then is that baseball's figured out a way to have that not happen again, and to find success through working together. The game is more popular than it's ever been. You never would have predicted that back in 1994, that that's where we would be today. So it's a pretty fascinating story looking at how that all played out.
We went back and talked to some of the folks that we'd felt had really helped us understand the game before. George Will, the columnist, Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian, Bob Costas, the broadcaster. But we also wanted to go out and interview other folks that we hadn't met, new writers of baseball like Howard Bryant and Tom Verducci. We interviewed a columnist from Sacramento, California named Marcus Breton, a Mexican-American, who could shed light not only on the Giants and their interesting passage with one of the most complicated players to ever play the game, Barry Bonds, but also could reflect what it's like to see that the game wasn't just black and white, but also brown, and that added a new dimension.
And then we got to talk to some people within the game, Joe Torre and Ichiro Suzuki, Pedro Martinez, Felipe Alou, Omar Vizquel are the people that we ended up getting interviews with, who gave us great insights into sort of behind-the-scenes moments and experiences that they had in the game.
We usually avoided the players, but in a few instances, when you have a Ted Williams, someone who is so compelling, or someone like Joe Torre who could make that first year of his tenure come alive, or could make you feel and understand what 9/11 meant, a significant milestone not just for our country but for the game of baseball, and we could see the significance of that milestone for the larger country through the experiences of baseball. We interviewed the broadcaster Keith Olbermann, who loves the game with a passion that is palpable. It opens the film, and his description at 9/11 is one of the most moving I've ever come across. We were able to go to the columnist Mike Barnicle, who is a passionate Red Sox fan and stands in for every Red Sox fan, because it's not just personal for us, it's generational. It connects us to our parents and to our grandparents and to our children, and what Mike was able to do was make you understand what it's like to be a Red Sox fan and suffer the defeat year after year after year, but also what it's like to be a father and a husband and a son in the lineage of that baseball story. And so you can share in his joy in 2004 in a way very few people can communicate.
Major League Baseball has been a great partner on this project. They have an incredible library. I think they were concerned about how some of the aspects of the story that we were going to tell would come out. And when we first started talking to them, they were wanting to know how much time were we going to spend talking about steroids, how big a part of the film was it going to be. And what we said, and I think they fully appreciated this, was we weren't out to do a hatchet job. This was not going to be, some expose. We were interested in looking at the deeper issues about why these things happened and how they affected the game.
No one likes to dig up the sad story, particularly when you sort of feel that you're getting it behind you. And so it's difficult to talk about steroids. But this is a necessary story you have to tell. All of a sudden, the 50 home run season, which was a rarity, suddenly became, journeyman infielders were doing it. And people were sort of saying, what's going on? It added a lot of excitement. It brought a kind of passion to the game. And after the devastating strike of '94, it was one of the reasons with Cal Ripken's heroics and other things that were bringing people back and saying, I really do love this game. But all of a sudden we woke up and we realized, you know what? We've cheapened the thing which is in some ways most sacred to baseball, that numbers mean something. That a 300 hitter means the same thing to my kids as it does to my great-great-grandfather. That's an important thing.
People really care about the fact that steroids has been a problem in baseball because people care about baseball, because baseball is important.
Suddenly we had these age-old records being shattered left and right. And while there's always going to be people trying to surreptitiously gain an edge, we can say, and I think our film celebrates, that we've come out of that storm and we can see, as our last chapter says, the sun is shining.
Last time around, I didn't really have a team. I liked the Dodgers, and that was a big part of our storytelling, but it wasn't really that personal. And this time, Yankees-Red Sox was a rivalry, not just in our film, but in our editing room. So it was really a lot of fun.
In the first series, it wasn't as passionate as it has been with this update, the 10th inning. And a lot of it is that no matter if you're a Red Sox fan or not, you stand back and the New York Yankees are at the center of the story of baseball. They are just the most important team in the history of baseball. They had Babe Ruth when it counted. The Red Sox had Babe Ruth and let him go.
I grew up with no team because my dad was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And when they left, he just had nothing to do with baseball. He hated the Yankees and he didn't care about the Mets, and so we had no team. And luckily for me, when I started working on the film, I wanted to, know more about the game, and I started going to more games. And right around that time was when the Yankees started to get really good. They built this incredibly great team, this core that's still there today, and they were just irresistible. And then Joe Torre came just after we finished our film, and after the strike ended, Joe Torre came to the Yankees. And so I think largely because of Joe Torre and all the players around him, became a huge Yankees fan. So that made it really fun making the film.
In the last inning, I did have to edit, at great pain, some of the worst moments of my life.
Deep to left. Yastrzemski will not get it. It's a home run.
When Bucky Dent hit a home run in 1978 in a one-game playoff that sent the Yankees to the World Series and not my beloved Red Sox. And then the ball going underneath Buckner's legs in the 1986 World Series against the Mets, and beginning to feel in subsequent years this sort of sense of being snake bit. That those were difficult things to do, but they weren't difficult for Lynn.
Ken is a rabid Red Sox fan, passionate, diehard, dyed-in-the-wool. Anyone, he just loves the Red Sox, and he's obsessed with the Red Sox, and they're hugely important in his life. We had a good sort of counterweight of Yankees, Red Sox throughout the whole editing process. It was really fun.
Everybody always tries to sort of figure out what it is that makes this such a great game. It is our national pastime. This has accompanied our whole narrative, and it is unique to sports. We always talk about football and basketball. Oh, Joe Montana threw a pass to Jerry Rice in the final seconds and they scored a touchdown and we won. Oh, Michael Jordan got the inbound pass with less than a second and he hit the three-pointer at the buzzer and we won. The baseball stories begin with my mom or my dad took me. My grandpa took me to this game, and then they describe incredible action. So you realize it matters very much, as we discovered in the national parks, not just what you were seeing, but who you saw it with. The defense has the ball. Name me one other sport in which the defense has the ball. And it actually doesn't matter in this sport where the ball is. We always follow in the highlights the home runs. It doesn't matter. It matters if the man scores. That's what matters. In every other sport, the soccer ball has to go into the goal. The basketball has to go through the net. But in this sport, the man scores. He comes home. And what does that plate look like, as Charlie McDowell said in our first series? A little house, It's home. It's home plate.
I think baseball resonates for people for a couple of different reasons. One is, I think that it connects families. And for many, many people, it's something that ties them to a parent, a grandparent, a relative, a child. And it's a shared experience. I mean, someone I was speaking to was saying that they never talked to their dad much growing up. And the only thing they ever did together was watch baseball games. Not all the time, but once in a while. They didn't even talk when they were watching the baseball game. The father had passed away, so when this person watched a baseball game, it reminded him of his dad. And I think it's that sort of very intimate connection within families that is a primal bond to the game.
I played when I was a kid. I played catcher because I was so small I could, even with the equipment, run up the baseline as fast as the runner. And in Little League, often the biggest play is the overthrow at first base, and I could back it up and the runner wouldn't advance. My daughters played, and it was so great. In fact, if you look carefully in the 9th inning of the original series, you'll see my daughter Sarah playing in Walpole, New Hampshire on a town team. And I have put Sarah in a place in the 10th inning as well. Now grown and about to start her own family. So, this is the heart of what it is, this sort of passing from generation to generation to generation, this love of something that is so utterly American and so utterly reflective. And so at its core, you don't have to think about that. I don't think about when I turn on the TV to watch the Red Sox each night, I don't think, oh boy, this is an American sport that reflects us. I'm going, they better win tonight. But all of that comes with it. And it's not baggage. It's something that I think makes me better. The love of baseball, I think, has made me a better American and a better person.